Second contact missions are tricky. These missions decide the course that two alien civilizations will take. First contact missions typically result in mere information exchange, as aggressive action is dangerous and foolhardy, with too many unknowns. Crown Prince Mindra started reading the first contact briefing for the umpteenth time on the newly discovered humans, hoping there was something new in the report that he had somehow missed. The purple amphibian-like sapient rubbed his pads on a metal pendant that hung around his neck in a self-soothing manner. The metal pendant was a royal heirloom that contained an image of his family, reminding him not only of his goal, but what his father would likely do in his current situation. Mindra attended many briefings and conferences with other aliens, but they were all supervised. This time, the Siab Prince would be entirely on his own. Fortunately, both parties agreed this was a simple information exchange before any treaty negotiations, and his father would be in charge of those negotiations. He was to act as an ambassador, learn whatever information he could, and pass it on to his father. He hoped that he could deliver on these responsibilities, helping to assuage some concerns within the royal court that he was a worthy successor. Spacefaring civilizations followed through 5 phases. Phase 1. Initiation. A civilization would begin taking its first steps to travel the stars. Phase 2. Expansion. The civilization would then explode outwards to mine and colonize as much and as fast as possible, ignorant of the consequences. Phase 3. Watershed. Spreading out too much and too quickly would have the byproduct of overreaching and spreading out too thin. The civilization would be vulnerable to an inevitable crisis. Either a nearby advanced race took advantage of their poor military presence, or the furthest colonies would assert their independence, forcing the homeworld to divert its military to enforce its policies. Overcoming the crisis was a critical juncture in their civilization. They would have to change, or cease to exist. Phase 4. Consolidation. They would need to enforce unification. Colonies and mining operations would relocate towards the civilization's center, so that military and politics could be more unified. Eventually, only a core number of systems would be left, with strip mining expeditions sent outwards. Phase 5. Stability. Loyal subjects would abide within a core number of systems, with the immediate surrounding area strip mined out, creating a natural border and buffer zone. As a result, the civilization would be protected from an outside invading force, since they would have no solid staging point to attack from. Any rogue elements would similarly have no viable location nearby to settle for independence or attack from. Mindra looked through the mission briefing, and it was apparent that the humans were beginning Phase 3. This might be the best opportunity for his people. The humans hadn't had the chance to strip mine around themselves, leaving a large swath of resources ready for the taking. Their size was a tenth the size of his kingdom. Recently, they had a big political upheaval, bringing in a new leader with little political background. With some probing, Mindra hoped to learn about the new leader and his concerns. New leaders could easily be coaxed into sacrificing their civilization's future in exchange for remaining in power, especially if they had no political backing. Of course, if their technology was crude enough, his father might opt for a simple invasion instead. All this hinged on how well Mindra could garner information based on his probes and observations. His studies were interrupted by the fleet commander. The human vessel LSS Beast and accompanying escort fleet have arrived. The LSS Beast was undoubtedly a luxury ship, retrofitted with advanced weaponry, rivaling Mindra's ship. The escort, in contrast, was low on the technology scale, but compensated with numbers and diversity in modifications. Examining the computer's display of the human fleet, Mindra was unsure if they were using their best equipment or only a sample. If he didn't know they were both human, he would have said both were made from two completely different civilizations. Mindra's best explanation was that humans were advanced enough for much more sophisticated technology, but lacked resources to mass produce it. He hated to admit it, but the humans' finest weaponry would likely outclass his people. That weaponry would undoubtedly be on the strongest ships. Whether or not the humans' more medium and modest ships were just as heavily armed or more cheaply made, Mindra could only guess at this point. It also bothered him how humans could develop those weapons sooner than his people, as humans had barely entered Phase 3, while his own had been in Phase 5 for more than a century. The lack of uniformity among the escorts signalled mercenaries or militia. The humans had likely deployed their forces elsewhere, with virtually no military escort. Perhaps the human political crisis wasn't quite as settled as they tried to make Mindra believe. All these thoughts raced through Mindra's mind as he watched the two fleets get into position. A shuttle launched from the human flagship into his vessel. He got up and headed to the shuttle bay to meet with the dignitaries. Welcome to the DSU Umlos. I am Mindra, Crowned Prince of the Drearcap Kingdom, and this is Commander Tshirt. I trust that your travels were well. Mindra's translator chip fluently articulated his language into the humans' higher-pitched and harmonic language. The humans were taller in person. Mindra had to appreciate that the briefing was incomplete. They had little hair and no fur, except at the top of their heads and around the top of their eyes. The middle one had fur around his mouth and the bottom of his head. Mindra had plenty of practice to not gawk at the humans' strange clothing, pigmentation and features. However, the humans did not. At least they tried to not make it obvious that they were staring everywhere. Clearly, the Sciaps were the first alien species that humans had ever contacted. The middle-third human stepped forward and gave a small, quick bow. Greetings, Crowned Prince Mindra. I am Steve Jackson, President of the Alniam Cluster. But please call me Steve. And these are my advisors, William Marcus and Catherine Ferris. Our travel here was fine, and I hope our meeting will be cordial, and we can be good neighbours. The human's translator converted the language into the Sciab language, comparable in quality to Mindra's translator. Still, despite being an unknown alien, Mindra noticed Steve emitting some controlled fidgets, including moving that colourful cloth knot around his neck. He might be on guard answering questions, but Mindra had the perfect answer for getting Steve more comfortable to answer some probing questions. I hope our meeting will be fruitful and bring about a prosperous future. Perhaps it would be best if everyone had a small chance to rest. Then we can dine together before we sit down and discuss things. Steve momentarily looked confused. Thank you, but I thought we ate different foods. You are correct. However, we do have protocols for different aliens with different diets. Your men would prepare the dinner you would eat, as will mine. We will only eat together at the same table. Ah, then in that case, we look forward to dining with you. The dinner and dinner conversation went quite well. Mindra had a grasp on the human leader. Steve Jackson was a mere commoner who had made a large fortune with a simple service many would use and some business sense to scale it. He had become a local hero for other commoners to aspire to. He also used some of his profits for many charitable acts. Mindra wasn't aware of the political dispute, but judging from Steve's mannerisms, Steve had unintentionally stepped into it. If Mindra had to guess, Steve spoke out against the old ruler, with masses rallying behind him because they shared his sentiment. And as the leader, they naturally made Steve the new ruler. But all Mindra could do was guess. Every time he hinted at something political, Steve rushed to change topics. Instead, Steve would focus on his philanthropy with a blissful yearning. He didn't like his new position, but felt he had no choice. Steve also spoke freely about his upbringing and time as a businessman, so Mindra was happy to share his stories about tutors and other Sciabs he grew up with. He didn't need to discuss anything close to the Drepcap Kingdom's secrets during dinner. Now they were alone in a separate room, and Steve could no longer sidestep the issues. Mindra found a way to start the topic. I didn't say this during the dinner, but I would like to personally congratulate you on your ascension to power. Oh, well, I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Everyone was mad at McAdam for his one-sided deal with Station Alnitak. It helped his buddies and screwed everyone else. I was just one of those people to actually say it. Just as Mindra thought, Steve stepped out and everyone rallied behind him. However, he didn't remember reading about Station Alnitak in the first contact briefing. Let me tell you, Steve continued, it wasn't fun going through that treaty process a second time with an already signed but nullified deal. Even after I nullified it, McAdam kept saying I was ruining the economy. It took until I made a completely different trade agreement with Mintica to shut him up. My advisors say that my likely opponents for the next election aren't going to rely on McAdam for the next campaign. So really, it's not my achievement, but McAdam's failure. It took a couple of moments for Steve's statements to make sense, for Mindra to respond. Election? The recent political upheaval was an election? I've seen aliens that have small elections. You vote for your heads of state, not just local leaders. And with no political connections, you manage to get the position? Yes, well, some places aren't like that, but Al-Nilam Cluster is at least like that. Mindra felt an inkling of something big hiding within that phrase, but he would need to reveal it. Station Alnitak and Mintakar, are those a part of the Al-Nilam Cluster? Are they a part of your home world you call Earth? Oh no, those aren't, and Earth is too far away. Let me show you. Steve pulled out a small tablet, tapped a command on it, and then set it on the table. A 3D projection of a cluster of stars was displayed. A purple section that Mindra recognized as part of his kingdom's borders, and a red section that Mindra also recognized as the area described in the first contact briefing. But what were those yellow and blue sections? All those sections combined were barely a third of his kingdom's size. Here is where Station Alnitak is. Steve pointed to a star in the yellow section. And this is where Mintakar is, pointing to a star in the blue section. The humans were this fractured? Suddenly, the lack of military escort presence made sense. They spent too much time destroying each other to scrounge up even fighters. They could be easy targets for the Drepcap Kingdom. Steve did a hand movement on the tablet, zooming out the galaxy. So many different colours filled the map. It boggled Mindra's mind. He subconsciously grabbed and fiddled with his royal pendant. Meanwhile, Steve pointed to one star with a unique highlight, amid the kaleidoscope of colours. This is Earth. Mindra felt his skin beginning to dry in fear, but he carefully kept his next words calm. Steve, are we the first aliens you had contact with in your entire species-known history? Yes. So all those different regions are other humans? Mindra was silent, still trying to process this news. His first question came out. All those different regions are different political entities, right? There aren't any buffer zones. How do you keep the peace and not attack each other? We don't. I can't think of a time when there wasn't a war somewhere. Most individual wars don't last more than a few years. But with so many, there's always something going on somewhere. I'm lucky there haven't been any wars in this sector for the past century. Then Steve started getting excited. Actually, since your discovery, there has been a general ceasefire. Even a few treaties were signed. Everyone is interested in you guys. A huge number of delegates went to Earth to discuss what to do, and a few ambassadors are coming in the next couple of weeks. And their ships will look so much better than mine. Even though I got a Starliner from Bedlagi shipyards, it's still just a civilian ship. You'll see the Scarab, and even the newest broadsword battleship straight from lunar shipyards. There are only 5 known built, and one is coming here. And instead of volunteer ships, you'll see professional fighters from all across human space. Nothing like that has ever happened before. Even Earth is sending us money and supplies to build an outpost station for our nation to help trade with you guys. Isn't that amazing? It's pretty unusual for a frontier nation. All they want is for me to ask you some questions since my nation is the closest to you. Mindra numbly nodded his head. His original mission had gained a new perspective. He would need to give the humans' questions some reasonable answers. He would not recommend his father to invade, but instead, to play nice with the humans.